Let me look at you. Everything's upside down. That would be your bum being waggled. Hello. Hello. It's all. It's. So I can't get. I've been playing with the YouTube thing, going back to. Yeah. Look at what I was doing 3 seconds ago. It's a very strange. That would be a very odd superpower to have, wouldn't it? If you could see yourself 3 seconds in the past, what would you stop yourself from doing?
Wow. I guess I would stop myself from doing all those clumsy things that I always do because I'm quite clumsy. So, like, oh, be careful with that door, those things, or, you're gonna bump into someone, or that's all I can think of.
Yeah, it might change the way. It might change the way I drive. Oh no, I didn't want to pull out then. No. Although I was in St Andrews yesterday morning, I had to check with Ash. I had to say, this isn't me, is it? Everyone was driving like absolute fucking lunatics. I mean, just pulling out to get round parked vehicles, but as I was approaching, I mean, like, just with no space, pulling out onto T junctions. One guy just reversing straight out of a parking bay. I mean, I slammed on the brakes and missed him by about a yard. It was just bizarre.
Okay, I'm about to send out the email.
Oh, okay. It strikes me I can pause the recording. Shall I pause it?
Yes, please.
Might as well reduce the amount of spare film we've got.
What have I done?
What's up?
No, nothing. I was just typing something and
okay.
Okay. So I'm about to send email to every participant. Do you want to see it first?
I'm sure it's fine. Do you want me to look over it, or are you? No, just send it.
I'll schedule a tweet for just 1 p.m.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
Done. Okay. Now I need just need to make myself a tea.
I got a email from a guy, Rick, who works in Audrey's office, with all the details of the next round of funding.
What is he saying?
He just anything I get from government. I mean, it's all the stereotypes are true. Yeah, it's like here are 3 versions of a slightly out of date document. Nobody appears to care that it's slightly out of date, but as long as we've got a bit of paper with a signature on it, that's all that matters. Please find attached documents for you to forward to us this year, next year, and the following year, as if I'm going to keep hold of them, It's like, please sign these, and then you go through, and I'm going to send it off to Rita to sign. Somebody needs to witness her signature, and it's like, really? Can we not just send you an invoice? So there we are. Public money, I guess.
Yes. It was Danny did a lecture for university in the US, and they sent him an email saying, "No, bear with us. It's a long process." They sent him 5 different forms to fill in.
Jesus.
Just 5 forms to get, I don't know, £100 or something like that.
Yeah. A guy I know was complaining that he needed to. He's an Irish citizen, and he needed to prove his eligibility to work in the UK to receive his £100 honorarium for supervising a PhD, invigilating a viva for a PhD. And he said, the amount of paperwork required for me to do that. He said, and this is for someone who is eligible to work here. I mean, he's a professor at King's. But he said there can be no possible way that this is justified, and it's like, really, you want me to do what? They wanted him to attend in person with his passport. And it's like, no, I'm just not going to do it. Yeah, no, it's just mad. And I don't understand. Just like sometimes you get requests for references for people, and like 8 pages long, and it's like, who the hell has time to fill this in? I mean, like, here we are.
The references system one day will die, I guess. Doesn't. Sorry, wait, I'm gonna close the door just in case.
Okay. It's only just struck me the amount of Danny's career to date that has featured my voice echoing in the room next to where he's trying to work is quite impressive. It's yeah. What will he do when he doesn't have the sound of me complaining about things in the background? I mean, he won't know how to adjust.
I don't know. He's been going to our local coffee shop in the mornings to work.
Okay.
But they allow dogs in.
Okay.
Sometimes there's this very annoying dog that snores. So he's there sleeping, doing nothing, but he snores. So you're there having a coffee. And I mean, I get it. It's nice to go to a coffee place with your dog, but at the same time, I mean, your dog is like an old car trying to,
Yeah. No, they can be quite distracting for everyone else. I'm just seeing if. So according to this, 3 people are watching on YouTube.
Okay.
I assume one of those is me and one of those is you, but then one of those is somebody else. Hello, somebody else. Obviously, that will now be broadcast on YouTube. How exciting.
So Camilla has just joined us on YouTube. So hi, Camilla.
Hello, Camilla. You may have gathered we haven't broadcast on YouTube before, so it's quite exciting.
Just
Hello, Audrey.
Hi,
hello.
Audrey.
Hi.
How are you
Right.
doing?
I'm good.
Just to let you know, we've got a couple of attendees watching already. Kim and Portia. Hello, Kim and Portia. And we're also live streaming on YouTube at the same time.
Okie doke. So what I'm going to have to ask you, Nick, is can you share the slides that I sent you? Because as you're the host, you'll have to share the slides. I can't share them.
I can certainly do that. So once we start, I'll share those. I'll just download them now. And if you wouldn't mind telling me when to change slides, then that will be good.
That would be great. I just haven't figured out how to do that on Zoom to get it passed over so I can do it.
I think at the end of this, we're all going to sit exams on advanced video conferencing and just see how we do.
Now let me just get my... When I use Zoom, I'm on my iPad, so it's a little more messy. Yeah, okay, that should be okay. Because we can't use it in work.
Oh, what do you use for
Teams?
Teams, okay.
Microsoft Teams.
And can you run webinars in Teams with external people?
Yes, you can bring external people in. Although I haven't run a full webinar on it, but you can bring external people into meetings.
Yes.
So, but yeah, I mean, I guess everybody's been having the same issue and trying to work out what works best for different types of meetings.
Yes.
We had so right at the start of lockdown, we initially set up a Zoom account, and then university after university after university, plus Scottish Government, plus the NHS, plus local authorities, all started ditching Zoom and moving to other things. So we eventually bit the bullet and set up a WebEx account just at the point that Zoom resolved most of its security issues and everyone started moving back again. So we set up a Zoom account again. It's all
and unfortunately we haven't moved back, so that's, which would be great if we did, because obviously a lot of external people are still using Zoom. Yeah. So
it's I think, I mean, they do all have different strengths, but they're also, I mean, there is an element of once you've mastered one, you've kind of mastered all of them. You know, it's
yeah, I mean, they're all pretty similar. I was using one called Jitsi for my home stuff. So while everybody else was using Zoom, I was using Jitsi at the beginning. I have a friend who's a professor of IT in Trinity in Dublin. Okay. He insisted we all use Jitsi because it was safer than Zoom at the beginning.
Well, it's so my dad lives in Peru and my brothers live in London, and so we for years had Skyped and done that thing that you do on Skype where you spend the first 20 minutes saying, "I don't think your microphone's off. Microphone, mic," you know.
Yeah.
And I had for some time before this saying we could use Zoom. You know, there's a program called Zoom. It's really good. We could use Zoom. And everyone would say, "Oh yeah, I'll see you on Skype next week then." And then lockdown happened, at which point all three of them started sending me messages saying, "There's this thing called Zoom. Have you heard of it?" It was like, yeah, all right.
Yeah. I've got my mum is well, I mean, she lives by herself in Dublin and she's very elderly and not in the best of health, so she has daily carers. So there's no chance of her using any IT whatsoever. But eventually one of her daily carers who has WhatsApp on her phone. So when this particular carer is on duty, she WhatsApps me so we can do kind of a FaceTime call, which is quite nice.
Yeah, no, that's really good.
When I first moved to Scotland and we started using Skype, and my grandfather, who was 90 at the time, was alive. And then first time he saw it, I mean, he was shocked and he kept saying, you know, "I can't believe this is happening. I have never imagined in my entire life that I would be talking to you, my granddaughter, who's in Scotland, from here, Alicante, and I'm seeing you, and I can see you smile." And it was incredible.
I know it is. It's a really strange experience. My mum was like that the first time as well. She was just, you know, awestruck. Just couldn't figure it out. You know.
I'm reading Neil Asherson's book Stone Voices at the moment, and brilliant read.
Brilliant book that, yeah.
But he's the chapter I was just reading last night. He was talking about setting up a call to what was then called Nyasaland in 1959. And it took 2 days to arrange the call. It's just like, that's 60 years ago. That's not a huge amount of time ago, And I can remember as a kid, making an international call, and it was tremendously exciting.
I can remember that, phoning relatives abroad, and it had to be arranged. You couldn't just pick up the phone and dial. There had to be a degree of arrangement because there was a connection that was going to have to be made, and you had to book that connection. It was quite a complicated business.
I was talking to a friend of mine in Canada who's done quite a lot of work on the Scottish diaspora in Canada, and he was saying that, obviously before Freddie Blaker, you moved to Canada or Australia, and that was it. You didn't expect to see your relatives again, maybe once you might, but that, it was a huge, a different style of decision. He said one of the interesting things that came about was that people would arrange this code between them. So you would phone people up and just say one word down the line. So you'd say Harry, and Harry meant everything's fine, I'll send you a letter at Christmas. Or, Felicity meant huge problems, but I'll write to you about it, and whatever. Because you could tell the phone companies if a phone call lasted less than a couple of seconds that it was the wrong number. And in a pre-computer age, nobody could go and check that you made the same wrong number every couple of weeks.
Yes, they were definitely different days.
They really were. So I'm just hopping between our so YouTube runs a few seconds behind Zoom, so every time I go and look at my the YouTube feed, it's whatever I was doing 3 seconds ago, and so I get to realize what a lunatic I looked like 3 seconds ago. It's a very unsettling experience.
I know we've all spent far longer looking at ourselves than we normally would, which is quite strange.
It has been well, several challenges presented this year. So we are about a minute to 1 o'clock now. We've got about 30 folk on Zoom so far, and about half a dozen on YouTube. I'm going to wait till a couple of minutes pass because I'm conscious that colleagues will have been coming from other meetings or from teaching or from other calls. So
no bother.
And once we sort of kick off properly, I think I mentioned, but I'll just double check this. Okay, we'd like to record this. So the recording's paused at the moment, but I'll start that again. Can I ask those attendees, if you are attending on Zoom, to communicate with us on the chat function, not the Q&A function. And if you could address any of your comments, there's a little to function at the top, address that to panelists and attendees, and everyone can see what you are saying. And similarly, if you're joining us on YouTube, you should see a chat function at the side there that you can just type into. And my colleague Mariola will be keeping an eye on that. She's just turned her video off for now, but she'll be able to see you're there as well. So essentially, please use the chat functions on both. We will kick off in about 2 minutes. I'm just going to go and open this. Get it ready. And Audrey, the slides are exactly as you sent to me yesterday.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I did a presentation for Abate, I think, earlier in the year, and I had set up my the webinar. I opened it about half an hour in advance, and we record these webinars. So I had to then go and edit it. And so I watched what I had been doing for half an hour when there was nobody else on the call, and just kind of wandering around my office, singing to myself, staring out the window, looking at things like this. And it's really, really worrying when you see what you look like. Oh.
Well, we shouldn't have any interruptions. My husband's just finished his lunch, so he's left the kitchen. And there's no children or dogs or cats. So the usual things that creep in.
The cats have vanished for now. I'm sure one of them will make an appearance at some point. Cool. Okay, I'll just give this another minute, and then I'll make a start. I'm just going to go and grab a glass of water. Everyone will start in literally 1 or 2 minutes, but if you want to grab a quick glass of water, or there's anything else you need to do, now's your time to do it. Okay, I think we're good to make a start. Can I start off just by thanking everyone for joining us? Just the scores on the doors at the moment. We have 52 people joining us on Zoom, and I think about a dozen on YouTube. So welcome, whichever platform you are joining us on. My name's Nick Bibby. I'm director of the Scottish Policy and Research Exchange. SPRE hosts events like this and produces various other materials on how academics can engage with policy. So if you're interested in that, please do follow us on Twitter at SPR Exchange. And take a look at our website, which is spre.scot. And we have a resources section there and various other tools you can use to help with your policy engagement journey, as I'm sure we should be calling it. I'm very pleased that we are joined today by Dr. Audrey McDougall, who is the Scottish Government's Audrey, I sometimes refer to you as the Scottish Government's chief researcher and sometimes as the chief social researcher. What actually is your title?
My official title is chief social researcher.
Okay.
A lot of people do say just chief researcher, but as I pointed out once, that would mean I was responsible for everything to do with research. And I am a social researcher rather than a natural science researcher, shall we say.
Okay.
So I do try to use social.
Okay.
Although, not to say that I don't work with our science colleagues, but it's a slightly different role.
Cool. In which case, I'll ask you to just say a little about your job in just a moment and explain how somebody comes to be in such a role. But I've started the recording now. We're going to go through a presentation and then leave time for questions at the end. Can I ask attendees, I'll just mention this again, if you want to ask a question, and please do, to use the chat function on Zoom rather than the Q&A function, slightly counterintuitively. And address your questions to all panelists and attendees. There's a little drop-down menu at the top there. And similarly, For those watching on YouTube, you should see a chat function at the side of your screen, and if you just ask any questions there, we'll keep an eye on that too. So, Audrey, just before we kick off with your presentation, welcome again. And could you start off just by telling us a little about who you are, the job you do, and how it relates to the world of research and policy?
Okay, so my current job is has got multiple elements to it. So I'm the Scottish Government's Chief Social Researcher, which means that I have responsibility for social research within the government from a kind of a strategic and an organisational perspective. So it's my job to ensure that we have researchers within government, that we have the right people doing the right jobs, that they're properly trained, that we use the right tools and techniques for the role, and that I promote social research throughout government and promote social research to policymakers and ministers. So it's very much a professional role, and my job really is to represent the profession. So that's my professional role as Chief Social Researcher. On a day-to-day basis, I'm head of one of the analytical divisions, and I'll explain later on really what that means. But just sufficient to say, from a day-to-day basis, I look after a team of people who include researchers, statisticians, economists, all of whom look at issues around poverty, social security, housing and inequalities. They're the issues that we cover under the heading of communities. And that's all about creating evidence and data to inform policy making and policy implementation. And in the current very strange situation that we're in, I've taken on a third role, which is I'm the co-director of the COVID-19 Analytical and Modelling Division, which is a division we set up back in March when we realised that we were in this for the long haul. And what we do in that division is to look at all data, modelling, science, evidence around COVID. And we provide that for all our, again, policy and ministerial colleagues. So I'm pretty busy at the moment.
I was going to say, it should keep you out of mischief. All right.
With all of that going on. Yeah, so that's what I do. My qualifications broadly, see, I've got, I started life doing something completely different. I'm a maths graduate originally. I was a chartered accountant. I was a management consultant, and then I moved into working in government. I stopped off for a bit to do a PhD in Edinburgh, and then joined the Scottish Government full time to be a researcher in the government, and then just over time gradually rose to become the Chief Social Researcher. So I've got a bit of a mixed background. I'm not a lifelong civil servant, unlike some colleagues.
All the best people have lived more than life, Audrey. I'm not going to say anything more than that. But cool. Well, in which case, I'll bring up these slides. It's thank you again for joining us, and particularly as you say, what is such a busy time. And we'll leave a bit of time for questions at the end. Let's see if I can make the technology work.
Perfect. So that's just my introduction. So I think I've more or less said that. Just on the front page there, we're just showing all our logos for the different professions we have, and you'll see that later. And I'll talk a little bit about each of the professions. And just to remind us of the context of the Scottish Government, I've put in an excerpt from our National Performance Framework, which is really our overarching guide to, in a sense, what the Scottish Government's aims and objectives are. Okay, Nick, we can move on. So what I'm going to cover today is just a little bit of what I call government basics, a little bit about the policy cycle. You'll probably all be pretty familiar with that, so I won't labour the point, but we'll just have a quick glance at that. Then I'll describe a bit about how research in government operates, which I think it's good for you to have a reasonable understanding of that, because that will help you work out, I think, more clearly how you might engage, who you might engage with, and the types of work we do, so you can see how your work would fit in, if you like. I'm going to talk a bit about easy mistakes to make, because I think it's better just to be upfront about this and say the things not to do. And then finally talk about what I would see as positive academic engagement with government. Okay, go on to the next one. So, I noticed a question that's coming up saying, can we access the slides afterwards? Yes, they can be made available, Nick, if that's okay with you. I'm happy for them to be made available. So people don't have to scribble notes.
That's fine. We'll circulate these and indeed the recording of this session.
Yeah, fine. So the policy cycle. So government basics. As I say, most of you will probably be familiar with this. And basically, it takes you through the whole idea of policy making. So the idea of agenda setting, formulating your policy, adopting a policy, the implementation stage, evaluation, support and maintenance, and then kind of back around to the beginning when you're starting to look again at where do you move to next. And the point about this is I think a lot of people think research is about formulation of policy. And this is where you come in and this is where you offer your research and this is what it can contribute to. But the point I want to make is that researchers have a role at every stage of this cycle. There's a role in developing and working out how to implement policy, how to implement it well. Then there's a role in looking at the evaluation of policy. But even in the ongoing support and maintenance of policy, there's always an element of continuous improvement, even if the policy itself isn't changing dramatically. So there's a role there in getting involved in that kind of continuous improvement idea. And then back to agenda setting, and there's a very big role for researchers in agenda setting. Particularly, you know, if you're looking ahead and you're thinking what's going to be coming up, what might be happening, what might be the future problems that people should be thinking about. And, you know, getting these onto the agenda with policymakers and ministers is quite a significant role there. So don't think you're limited to any one aspect of this cycle. There's opportunities for researchers at every aspect of this cycle. And depending on the nature of your own particular research, it might be that one element of the cycle suits you better than others. Next slide. So research in government, it's supported in a variety of ways, but the two main ways that we support research or we use research in government is either directly through commissioning work from consultants and academics, or directly in-house with our own in-house researchers, scientists, economists, and statisticians. Now, at the bottom of this slide, as I said, I've put the logos up of our four main groups of what we would call analysts. So there's the Government Economic Service, there's the Government Social Research Service, the Government Operational Research Service, and the Government Statistical Service. And all analysts who work in government will be members of one of these four professional bodies, if you like. They all have entry criteria, usually an academic type entry criteria, maybe some experience. And then they all have quite clear pathways, career pathways within the government that move you from one level to the next within these different services. And we use, I suppose we use ideas and skills from people with different backgrounds through these different services to come together to produce our research, our analysis, our data, and our evidence. If there's one thing I've learned in my time in government is that no one profession or no one perspective has all the answers. And you definitely get the best answers when you bring people together who have different skills, different training, different backgrounds. Are these UK or Scottish research services? Good question. These four are UK. So it's the UK Government Economic Service, the UK Government Social Research Service, and so on. So we're organised on a UK basis. However, I suppose we have an element of devolution in how we organise ourselves in Scotland. So I'm the chief researcher, social researcher in Scotland. There is a chief social researcher for the United Kingdom. But I'm, you know, so I very much take responsibility for things in Scotland, but I represent Scotland on the UK board for social research. Okay, next slide. So just to just tease that out a little more, the sort of work we do. So we work across government in collaboration with each other and in collaboration with partners. And as I say, we do use a wide range of approaches, tools, techniques. So this can be synthesis of evidence. It can be actually commissioning or conducting ourselves applied research and evaluation. modelling and forecasting, looking at cost benefits, national surveys and national statistics. So that's a really big job for government, as you might imagine, because just for the scale, we are quite often the best people to carry out large national surveys and to produce national statistics. We also do reporting on the National Performance Framework, which, as I said, is really our statement, the government's statement of its policy objectives and aims. And finally, something that I think people perhaps don't think about as analysts, but we do contribute quite significantly to core government business. And a fair bit of our time is spent on issues such as answering parliamentary questions, preparing materials for First Minister questions, contributing to impact assessments, such as equality impact assessments, or even business regulatory impact assessments, and contributing to the Programme for Government, which is the annual, if you like, statement of the government's objectives and aims for the year, and spending reviews, which could be the annual look at the budget and deciding how money is going to be spent. So as analysts within government, we contribute in many, many different ways across different ranges of work. And when we're looking outwards to our academic colleagues, these are all areas that we're interested in input to. So it's not limited to one type of research or one type of input. There's quite a wide range of activities that you can get engaged in. So this slide will just give you an idea of that range and the kind of things that we do. Next slide, Nick. So this is how we're organised. And I'm showing you this because, I think it might help you to think about where would you sit in this if you wanted to have your work considered by government or you wanted to make contact with government. Where would be the areas that you would want to focus on? So there's 3 heads of profession in government. There's myself, there's a chief economist, and there's a chief statistician. We each have our own offices that do various different activities. We've set them out there. And we also have a chief social policy advisor, who's Carol Tannehill, who's linked with the Glasgow Centre, as director of Glasgow Centre of Population Health Studies. I've got that wrong, Glasgow Centre of Population Health, who gives us that kind of external view and helps us to bring in the academic view into government. We're organised on a day-to-day basis on what we call analytical service divisions, and you can see how they cover different areas, and different areas are brigaded within those. And within those different areas, the different professions come together and work with policy. So, for example, taking education, that covers all aspects of education from cradle to grave, one might say. And the people there will work across policy colleagues who look after early years, who look after schools, and who look after colleges and higher education. So we work across a range of different issues. In fact, one of the interesting, I suppose, facts of being a government analyst is you work across a range of issues. You're very rarely just working on one issue. But the downside of that means that at times maybe you don't get the depth of knowledge or engagement you might like to get on a very specific issue. And that's where our academic colleagues can be really, really useful to us in helping us to get that kind of depth of knowledge that we need on individual issues. Now, a question popped up there, which I think was around input to policy. Is that most of our work? It's a lot of our work. It's not all of our work, though. We do look at implementation as well. So not just how policy is made, or not just what policy is made, but how policy is implemented and the evaluation of policy. And increasingly, and an example of this might be the establishment of the Social Security Agency, looking at how you actually set up an organisation and set up procedures, policies, structures, staffing, and just organise the, just help to, just establish the agency. Next slide, Nick. I'll come back to questions afterwards. There's just a couple that have really just popped up on me, so I'm quite happy to come back to others.
Okay, yeah, I was just going to say we can take the questions all together at the end.
Mm-hmm. So we'll go on to the next slide. So social research is probably what most of you would be interested in. And just to give again an idea of the range and types of work: evidence reviews, policy evaluation, primary research, monitoring social trends, behavioural analysis, which is an area that's growing for us actually. I'm doing kind of more work looking around behavioural insights and behavioural issues, particularly relevant at the moment with COVID actually. And offering advice on methods, developing new methods, and offering advice on methods even to policy colleagues on things like participation, consultation, those kind of issues. And you'll just see below just badges giving some idea of some of the work that we've done, which is quite a range. So we've got survey work, such as Growing Up in Scotland, the Scottish Attitude Survey. We had some quite detailed technical work that was done around minimum unit pricing for alcohol. There's work that we've done very directly with the public and engaging many members of the public, looking at, you know, what poverty means and actually hearing from people who are experiencing poverty and living with poverty. So we do engage in a wide range of different types of activities. Some of these we carry out in-house. Some of these we contract out and commission out completely. And quite often it's a combination of both. So we have external academics and other organisations working with us on, working jointly on projects. So that's our social research offering, if you like. Nick, go on to the next. Now, our statisticians, as you might imagine, very much around the collection and dissemination of statistics, but more than that as well, trying to not just produce official statistics and publishing official statistics, but thinking about how we use data and how best we use data to inform policy. I never want to make it as clear as quant-qual, because while a lot of social researchers are qualitative, we also have quite a number of our social researchers are quantitative. So it's not that the researchers do all the qual and the stats people do all the quant. It's a lot more of a mixture than that. But there's no doubt that some of our statistics colleagues are very, very expert in perhaps more of the unusual statistical methodologies, and that's where we would probably draw help on if we were doing research and looking for that kind of level of statistical input. There's also, as you might imagine, quite a big growth area in around statistics, in around data science, in around big data, and in around the use of administrative data and data linkage, all of which are significant areas for government. Next slide. Now, operational research is quite a new profession in Scotland. The UK government departments have had operational researchers for some time. For us, it's relatively new. And it was the establishment of the Social Security Agency that really drove us bringing in operational researchers to work in government. Operational researchers use a range of techniques. So they use a range of qualitative and quantitative techniques. But some of their particular specialty is in and around modelling. And it's in around I suppose, very applied research. So giving an example here of some of the items that our operational researchers have worked on. So looking at things like caseload and expenditure on social security, resource requirements for social security, modelling demands across the criminal justice system, looking at HR workloads. It's very much about very practical implementation issues that our operational researchers get engaged in. And just to give you like a very pragmatic example, really, if you're trying to work out how many people do you need to run a service to deliver benefits, how do you do it? Well, it's the tools and techniques that our operational researchers bring to bear that would enable them to produce models that might be able to tell you how many people you're going to need, how long it'll take, how many benefits you can process a day, all of those kind of issues. So it's applying research in a slightly different way to perhaps the way that you would traditionally think, but it actually uses quite a lot of the same tools and techniques. Next slide. And finally, I've got our economists, and obviously it's both macro and microeconomics. So macroeconomics is study the economy as a whole, microeconomics, individual households and firms. And, you know, a key question for economists always in the government is why and how should the government intervene in an economy? Depending on one's political views, you might have different views on that, but, you know, leaving that to one side, it is always a reasonable question to ask as a starting point, is why and how should government intervene? And these are some of the issues that our economists look at, forecasting the economy. You'll be familiar with GDP statistics and kind of economic forecasts that get published. Doing appraisals, cost benefit analysis, business cases to make investments. Looking at modelling impact and value. So, I mean, an example of that might be, and where there would be interaction, say, with social research. If you wanted to try and make the case as to why early intervention is better than to prevent problems later in life. So why you should spend more money, for example, on early years education, rather than later on having to have more remedial action to pick up for people who struggled at the beginning. You could do it on just many bases you can look on this, but one of them would be our economists would be able to tell you what's the cost over the years of having people who are struggling because of a lack of early intervention. And that costing over a number of years, where you're looking at that kind of economic cost of failure of government, if you like, in the early years, would give you a very good basis for making the case to make an early years spend. So we do a lot of work in conjunction with our economics colleagues, because as well, if we're looking at evaluation, we tend to look at whether policies have achieved their aim, but you also want to know about the efficiency of the policy and the value for money of the policy, because you want to make the best use of the funds that you have. So you need to know something about the costs and benefits that you've achieved as well. So quite a lot of joint work goes on across all of these four groups. And as I say, we're organised in a way that we mix in together with each other, although we each have very firm kind of professional identities and skill sets. Next slide, Emily. So I'm moving on now to talk about the engaging with government. So having just set out really how we're organised and who we are, I'm now moving straight into the easy mistakes to make, because I thought, as I said, it was better just to be upfront about that one. And let's just think about the things that probably doesn't work very well to do if you're trying to engage. Now, apologies to many of you who will absolutely know this, but you know, it can be a useful reminder. And for those of you who haven't had much to do with government, perhaps it will just help you to avoid making any of these mistakes. So the first thing is, we speak to many people, and many people speak to each other within government. So if you come along and speak to one person, that's unlikely to have an impact. And you're not going to be the only person we'll have spoken to. So we wouldn't necessarily go and speak to one academic, for example. We might speak to a number coming from different disciplines or different approaches, or at different places. We wouldn't just speak to academics either. We would be speaking to a range of people. So from our perspective, we would speak to a range of people. And from your perspective, again, speaking to one person probably wouldn't be sufficient to affect some change. Something that I think people can find a bit frustrating is this sort of idea of, I've solved that one years ago, the kind of idea that maybe you've written an article, you've published an article, and it set out the problem and it set out a solution. We haven't noticed. Well, yeah, we won't have noticed probably. Publishing in academic journals tends not to be noted by policymakers. So the communication has to be very different to bring ideas to the attention of policymakers. Most of us, those of us who work in analysis would like to be able to spend a bit more time reading academic journals, but we just don't have the time. And actually, we don't have the same access that you have in university either. So there is something about the need to actually bring writing and bring research, bring work to our attention. The next two are quite similar in people looking for funding. So people may have funding applications they want to put in, or they may approach us with great ideas they have for projects. One thing as civil servants we have to do is abide by public finance rules. So we can't just give out money. That's just not possible. Now, that's not to say that you can't have conversations, or we can't have conversations around ideas, but we always have to engage in proper procurement and competitive processes to commission work. We can't just commission work by handing money to one person. And I think you could see why that is. As civil servants, we have to be even-handed, and we have to make sure there's proper use made of public finance. And the final, I suppose, line I've put up here is the government should just, I know people can think that at times, why on earth haven't you just done X, Y, Z? It's so obvious. Actually, there can quite often be very good rules why. Path dependency is a big issue, but there can be many reasons why what seems like an obvious question or an obvious solution. Don't assume it hasn't been thought about, but there can be other reasons why things just won't work, or won't be acceptable. So always worth, talking around these issues and not just kind of jumping to that conclusion and saying this is what you must do. Okay, so on to the next slide, which is, so something a little more positive, which is about positive engagement. And I would say the key things for positive engagement: be very aware of the current policy debates in your field, both in Scotland and the UK. So you may be working on a particular issue, a particular subset of a very large field. But if you're going to engage with government, you need to be aware of the broad current political debates. So you know what's going on more broadly in your field, and you've got some idea around the political perspectives that exist in and around that area. So do a bit of research on the policy environment. If you're trying to sell ideas to us, ideas have to be possible, affordable, legal, politically acceptable, well-timed. These are things that you need to think about if you're going to talk to us about research, and particularly if you want to push ideas that you think are good ideas. Building networks, relationships matter. Most interaction is done through personal relationships, through people talking to each other. And you need to build your network. So it's never too early to start doing that, to build networks of people so that people within the government know who you are, and you know people in government, and you can just come and talk and have conversations, because it will in many cases take a number of conversations for anything to happen. Things won't just happen on your first conversation. I'd say develop a clear offer and make it enticing. And that's a really tricky one. And I remember when I was doing my PhD, you kind of have this idea that your research is so all-encompassing. Why isn't everybody else absolutely fascinated with it? And that's not always the case. But that may be the case at times because of how it's being presented, not even just because of the topic. So there is something about thinking about how you make what you're doing relevant and enticing, so that people are really keen to listen to you and hear what you have to say. I would say learn from successful academic colleagues and others. And I say the and others because think tanks are usually pretty good at this, getting their work in front of policymakers. And they do it because they start, I think, from relevant policy questions. At a very early stage, they create engagement strategies. They don't wait until the research is done and then think about how to communicate it. They think right from the beginning about how they get people involved and engaged in their research and what that engagement and communication strategy is going to be. They issue press releases, they speak to media, and they speak to ministers. They just make much more of probably a lot more of their time and effort is spent on that communications element to it and that engagement element than the actual work itself. Not necessarily the right thing to do, particularly from an academic perspective, but that communication and engagement is important, and it's something you should think about from the beginning. And the final sorry, I'll just go back there for a minute. When I say learn from successful academic colleagues, use successful academic colleagues. I'm not quite aware of who signed on today, but if you're a PhD student or you're an early careers researcher and you're working for or working with or being supervised by a professor who has good government links and is quite often going off to speak to the government, ask if you can come along. Come to meetings, even if you're just sitting there taking notes. Come to meetings, see how they're handled, see how the relationship works, see the kinds of conversations and types of questions. That's really good learning. From our perspective, if people come to see us, we're quite happy if people bring a student with them or an early careers researcher colleague with them. That's not a problem from our perspective. But if you can get your senior academics to do that, you'll learn a lot from it, just seeing how these things operate in practice. And then finally, I said, develop your writing style for policymakers. Academia is a very particular writing style. And I did my PhD after working for a number of years. And it took me my first couple of essays to switch my writing style back and get it into an academic style. There's different registers of writing. And it's a good idea to become very aware of that and be very aware of the different registers of writing that you use to write for different contexts. So the way you write in a journal is different to the way you might write in a report for policymakers, is different again to the way you might write in a blog for the general public, let's say. And to be consciously aware of that and to be able to switch from one style to another, I think is something that you need to develop. It'll stand you right through your career in many, many ways to be able to do that. So final slide, Nick. There's one more. Yeah, don't give up. Policy-making processes can take years. I mean, think of wicked issues: poverty, homelessness, unemployment. There's many wicked issues that social policy deals with. And the policy-making processes are ongoing in those areas, and they don't move things quickly by any means. So processes can take years. You can be engaged for a long time. There will be setbacks. There will be times when you feel you're not able to get in and speak to people. There will be times when perhaps your particular area of research or branch of inquiry just isn't top of the agenda and people just aren't really interested in listening to you right at that moment. Don't worry, it'll come top of the agenda at some point, and you've got to remember that. Friendly people do move jobs. I don't think we're quite as bad as we used to be in moving around in the civil service, but we do move around. And I know people find it quite frustrating when you've spent a lot of time cultivating relationships and then that person moves. Quite a good tip is if you've got a good relationship with someone and you know they're going to move, ask them for an introduction to their replacement. So make sure that you have a ready set introduction to the person who's going to replace them. And then you can kind of more easily move in and start having a conversation. It's not easy to show how your work impacts on policy. And I know for ref purposes, that's a tricky one, because it's rarely one piece of work that makes a really big policy change. It's usually a combination of different pieces of work, different levels of advice, different types of advice. But we can help with that, and particularly for anybody out there who is interested in impact statements, we can help with that, and we can help you think about how your work might be presented and described to explain how you've made an impact. And finally, you may or may not want to engage indeed. I mean, there will be some people, some academics who really just aren't that interested in engaging in the kind of work that we do in around government, and that's fine too. There's nothing to say that everybody has to engage. But if you really want your research to make a difference in that policy space and make a difference, hopefully, for the particular groups within the people of Scotland that you're interested in, then I would say, yeah, be prepared to engage and don't give up. I'll stop there, Nick, and take questions.
Thank you very much, Audrey. That was really, really useful. I learned a lot from that, actually. Yes, all sorts of kind of excellent top tips there. Think about the policy question you're addressing, not just, I think it's often tempting. Oh, we finished this piece of research. I must tell somebody about it now. How can I push this paper or this chapter? Which letterbox do I send it through? And someone will obviously be interested in this because I've been working on it for 5 years. And often that's not quite how things work. We've had a couple of questions. Apologies if I inaccurately summarize these to colleagues, but talking about whether government might be interested in particular methodological approaches or will factor in, will take account of ethical considerations within the research process. To what extent, when you're looking at external research, do you think about the methodology that's brought you to that place? And to what extent are you just looking at the findings of that research and how they might speak to a particular policy question?
Now that's an interesting question. I'm interested in methodologies insofar as, what would interest me is why people have chosen a particular methodology to use for a particular piece of research. And I would be making, I guess, my own judgment on whether I thought that was the most appropriate methodology for that to answer that research question. Because flipping that question around, if I'm trying to think about methodology, I start with the research questions. Always start with the research questions. What are the questions I'm trying to address? And then I'll think about the methodologies that are most suited. So if I was doing the research, that would be the approach I would come from. But that's because I believe in mixed methods research, and I'm quite a fan of mixed methods research. But if you've adopted a particular approach, that's fine. But I think it's an explanation as to why that approach is the most appropriate one for those questions and how it contributed to your findings. And maybe if you want to be really reflective, whether things might have been a bit different had you adopted a different approach, which can be quite an interesting reflection as well. And one that I quite often do as well. If we go down a particular road and do things a particular way, you know, I will think about that afterwards when I look at the results and think, would they have been different had we done something in a different way?
Just to clarify, we get this question quite a lot. There's, I think, often an assumption that government is really only interested in double-blind reviewed, massive data studies, and is less interested in user experience research or more kind of quantity approach, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely not. But there is a difference here between the UK government and the Scottish government. Okay. The UK government and many UK departments are very interested in RCTs and very much go down an RCT route, randomised controlled trial route. However, in Scotland, we are interested in quantitative data. We tend not to go down the RCT route, but we are very interested in data linkage, the use of administrative data, the use of big data, if you like. But we're very interested as well in participatory approaches. So we're interested in engaging our users, engaging, well, I think users of services, but engaging the public and finding ways of working with the public. So, for example, when we established our experience panels for Social Security to develop the Social Security system, that was signing up 2,500 people from across Scotland to work with us to design the system. So that was an example of using the public very much as co-designers.
Okay.
And that's an approach that we adopt a lot more. So people who have skills in and around qualitative research, the usual qualitative research type skills that you would adopt around different types of interviewing, focus groups, consultation and ethnography, all of those issues, all of those skills, if you like, are valued and used.
Okay, thank you. As it was starting to get quite a lot of questions on the how bit of how to engage, what's good approach to take. Just before I move on to those, we had a couple of questions from people, particularly thinking in terms of work on cultural policy, but this would apply more generally as well. So if there's a researcher who's working on, let's say, culture, and they want to know who to connect with, where should they start? Is it just a case of phoning the switchboard on Scottish Government and saying, you know, put me through to a researcher working on culture? What's a good starting point?
So I always recommend that people, when they try to contact, go in through these analytical service divisions. I do think that's your best starting point, because what you'll get in contact with there are fellow researchers, you fellow analysts, and they can help you make those wider links as necessary or help you translate your work. To find out who within those areas, I'm wimping out here slightly and saying you're just going to have to go to our website and have a look, because there are different people in different areas within education and local government and justice and so on. So I think you'll need to go through our website for that, specifically to find out who to go to. But your best starting points are the analytical service divisions. I would recommend they can, as I say, help you. We play a bit of a knowledge brokering role in that sense. We can help you make that transition into government.
Just to echo that, I mean, our experience has certainly been that if you connect in government and in other policy institutions, actually, if you connect initially with other researchers, they at least get where you're coming from and can often then work as a guide. They can help you navigate what is often, I mean, if people think universities are complex organizations, you should try looking at a government and can help you navigate that role. So I think that's good advice. So we've had a few questions about sort of techniques people can use in terms of how to engage, and I suppose there's two issues there. One in terms of general tips across the piece. So what is important in terms of brevity, appropriate use of language, clarity, and so on. But then also, are there particularly good places to engage? When is using the media helpful? When's it unhelpful? Do people read blogs? Do people follow Twitter accounts? What are some helpful tools to engage? And I guess one we haven't had, but I would add in, is I often find people assume that the best way to connect with government is to be as loud as possible until somebody notices. And I find sometimes actually that can be counterproductive. And a quiet conversation with a civil servant it can be a good starting point rather than trying to be on the front page of the Daily Record. But perhaps I'm wrong. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think, let me just think, different formats. People certainly use Twitter, and people will follow on Twitter. So if you've got interesting things to say, once you get that initial kind of connection where people know your name, that certainly is something that people will look at. I've already mentioned coming in through the analyst route, policymakers as well. There's something about building up your relationships in government rather than going straight to the minister. I should say, if you go straight to a minister, if you do email a minister and say, look at this, what will tend to happen is the ministerial office will pass it straight back to the analysts and say, this has been sent to us. What do you think? Is this something we should pay any attention to or not? It's very rare that a minister would actually be picking that up, looking at it and, expressing a real interest immediately in it. They would always ask for an opinion. So in some ways, you're better to go through it the opposite way, because we can help you work out how to present your work, how best to present your work. We can organise as well for people to come in and give talks, presentations, and to meet with relevant policymakers if we think the work is particularly relevant and useful. And we certainly do that. And some of the work that I've done when I've been working with researchers coming in is help researchers to shape then the presentation that they're going to give to policymakers, so that it's presented in a way that has most chance of really gripping attention and making people interested in following through. That's really important. I think having a media presence is absolutely fine, but just think about it. If your media presence is a constant critique of the government, then don't be surprised if you think maybe the government aren't too keen to meet you. Now, I'm interested in meeting lots of people, and I want people who have criticisms as well. We don't just want people who are saying everything is wonderful. Of course, we want people who are critical, but it's constructively critical is what we're looking for here. So people who want to engage to make things better. So it's not to say don't criticize, but think about how you do it.
And I think that that thing that is really easy to forget, that governments are made up of people, and that if you've just got off the 1 o'clock news shouting about how rubbish somebody is being and how they don't understand what they're doing, to then expect to walk into a meeting with them and have them say, "Oh, how lovely to see you," is perhaps a bit over optimistic. Are there any? You talked a bit about sort of classic don't do's. I mean, what are some of the mistakes that you routinely see? I mean, I guess often this is difficult landscape to navigate, and knowing what is devolved, what is reserved, what government does, what Parliament does, what local authorities do, what public agencies do, and so on. Are you often contacted by people and it's just like, that's not us, you need to speak to Edinburgh City Council, or whatever it happens to be?
Actually, do you know what? That one's not too bad. I think where people sometimes struggle is the reserves devolved between UK and Scotland. And there are issues that are borderline and there are grey areas. So that can be tricky. I appreciate that. But that's one that people at times, I think, don't, quite understand. So I would suggest that, before you can certainly contact us and ask questions, but, it would be a good idea to do a little bit of your own research first to try and suss that out. And particularly if it's an area you're working in, you really need to develop that understanding. You need to have a good understanding of that yourself anyway. It's something that, colleagues generally, my policy colleagues and colleagues I work with, again, it doesn't help. It doesn't help building relationships if you come in and you talk to us and you start talking about, for example, the UK education system. There isn't a UK education system. Each country in the UK has its own education system. So sometimes the language you use and how you talk about these things can create an impression on whether you really know your stuff or not, and how really engaged you are with what's happening in Scotland. So there's something there, I think, to think about. But we'll always try and point people in the right direction.
And if so I'm just trying to frame this in my own head to draw together a couple of the things that people have said. Can you talk us through, if you like, the journey of a piece of knowledge? So if I've done all the things you've suggested, I've found a relevant policy question. I know it's going to be something that's coming up slightly in the future, so I'm not asking people to deal with it now this second. I've perhaps written a policy briefing, and I've used clear language, and it falls on your desk or that of one of your colleagues, and you say, well, this is really interesting, this is really useful. What happens then? Where does that go, and what should I be bearing in mind about what might happen to that piece of research if I'm looking to have an effect within government?
So I might look at that piece of research then, and I'll share it with a few colleagues and say, I've just had this in, this looks really interesting. That could be relevant for, our policy in a particular area. What do you think? And, I get a few colleagues who'll come back and comment. And I may also ask, has anybody come across, if it's not a name I know, not a researcher I've previously had dealings with, I will ask if anybody else has had dealings with that person and if they know them. So I'll try and find out a little bit there. Then if we think, this is really good, then I'll probably contact the person, ask for conversation, have a conversation with the researcher, just explore a bit more about the research and where the research sits in their overall body of knowledge. Because again, quite often what we're looking for is people's overall body of knowledge, not just one project. So I'd want to talk to them a little around that. If I then thought, no, this is really good, there's something really here, and this person has a lot to say and it's really relevant, then I would I would probably bring them into the government to have a conversation. And at that point, I would probably be looking to introduce the relevant policy colleagues. So the relevant policy colleagues could hear what that person had to say and have a chance to question them and talk to them. That would happen. And then you might hear nothing more for quite some time. That's typically what would happen. Because what would happen then is, we would go away, the analysts would go away, the policy colleagues would go, we'd all go away. And we'd think, yeah, that was really good. Now, how does that feed into our policy? And how does that influence our policy? And it may, to a very small extent, it may to a larger extent. It may help us to frame our questions better. It may help us to, take a slightly different approach. But where you'll find it difficult as a researcher is always seeing that, because next a policy document will appear in public and it'll say, this is our new policy, from next March, we are going to do X, Y, and Z. And because of the way we write, we don't reference in the same way as academics reference. So your work may be part of that, but you may not clearly see that. Now, what I'm trying to do is to move us more to a position where when we produce a policy statement, we produce a statement of evidence alongside it. And we're trying to do that more and more, so that there's a policy statement, there's some evidence, so people can see the evidence that's underpinned the policy. Now, as we move more and more to that, then you've got a better chance that your work will be overtly recognised. That you're more likely to be quoted, or at least included in the bibliography, if you like, that there is actually a recognition. But at the moment, that's perhaps the downside of engaging with us, is that it's not always all that clear where your work has had impact. And what you might like to do, if you've gone through that process and it all seems to be going really well and you're having these conversations, and it might not just be one conversation at one meeting, it might be a number of conversations at a number of meetings, ask that you're notified as to the kind of end result of the project, if you like, when the policy is published, when it draws to an end. Make it clear that you are interested in knowing what happens and ask to be notified of that. And that will help you to perhaps more clearly see what's happened. But I will agree that at times it's not that easy to necessarily see exactly how your work impacted.
I mean, obviously, colleagues may have an eye on ref impact case studies and so on, and I know that's territory that you're aware of, and that statement that yes, we did take this into account, I know can be very useful. That's great. We have a couple more minutes left. I mean, I do have an idea for another question, but I don't want to stop anybody who's watching this from asking. If there's anyone who is burning with desire to ask a question, please do so now. I say please use the chat, not the Q&A function. Okay, in which case maybe I can ask one final question. One thing we're often asked by doctoral candidates and other researchers: what opportunities are there for jobs in policy or for internships and secondments, and where should people look for those?
Okay, so I've just finished a recruitment round actually, and we've just recruited about 40 new social researchers to join us. So we'll be recruiting again near the probably middle to the end of next year. People come in at different grades. I mean, typically, I'll not go into the government grading structure. Sufficient to say you come in at different grades. And when we advertise jobs, you can have a look and you can work out where you think you might fit. But we do recruit externally every year. So we do take on researchers every year, and that could be from new graduates to quite experienced researchers. We employ people at different levels. It's an interesting challenge coming into the government as a more experienced researcher, perhaps, because if you're coming in at a more senior grade, it's perhaps a little more difficult to actually, just work out how to work in government. But it can be done. It's what I did myself, but it's a bit more of a challenge. But that's certainly, we do that every year. We are just about to, internally, we're putting together our PhD intern program for 2021. So we will be going out and advertising, looking for PhD interns, which is our 3-month program, where you come and you do a project for us for 3 months, and essentially you get paid the same as if we're in the SRC stipend for those 3 months. And your ESRC gets extended for the 3 months. And you do a piece of work for us. Normally it's quite a bounded project. There's some very particular thing that we want done, but you'll be based within one of these divisions. You'll be working with people in the division. You'll be doing your project, and you'll get the opportunity to meet with policy people. You get the opportunity to present your results to a mixed audience. It's a really good opportunity to see what it's like working in government. To decide maybe you'd like a career there yourself, to decide maybe you absolutely hate a career there and it's not for you, but it will give you a better idea of then how to engage, because then when you go back out into academia, you've seen how it works and you've seen how the people interact, and it will give you a better idea how to interact, and you'll have made some contacts just from your work there. I should say a lot of our staff are ex-interns and people who have worked for us and then come back.
Yes, I was going to say that I had it on good authority that a lot of analysts had previously done exactly that internship program. It's a great opportunity, and I would recommend it. From memory, a lot of those internships are advertised through the Scottish Graduate School of Social Science.
That's right.
Yeah, so it's where to look at. We're also actually about to launch an opportunities page, which will try and bring all those together on. But it turns out, of course, everyone in every discipline works to slightly different timescales. So we're trying to work out how to cross that problem at the moment. But we'll get there. Cool. It's 2:00, so I don't want to open up any more questions, because we could, I think, easily be here all afternoon. But I'm sure you have things to do. Thank you again for making time to come and talk to us. We will share those slides, and as I said, we'll share a recording of this once we've. I'm sure everything you've said is fine. We need to clean up some of the nonsense I've said.
Edit out all the ums and ahs, and I know it's dreadful when you listen back to yourself.
It's terrifying. It's but we will share all of those. I would mention our website again, spre.scot, and also our Twitter feed at SPR Exchange. You can sign up on there for our newsletter and also access to a thing we produce called the Brokerage, which gives a weekly roundup of all formal government and parliamentary inquiries that are taking evidence for the Scottish, UK, Welsh and Northern Irish governments and assemblies. So do have a look at that. SPRE also offers training to early career researchers and others, so please just get in touch with us if you'd be interested in that. I think that is everything. I've almost certainly forgotten something, but there we are.
Well done, Nick. That's the advertisement done. So I'll finish off with my little advertisement then. Thank you, everybody, for coming along. It's really strange when I can't see everybody. It's so disconcerting. Because I do like talking to people, but it's very nice to be able to see them. But thank you all for coming along and for your questions, which were really great. And yeah, I could say, you know, our PhD interns will be coming up and internships will be coming up, and we will be recruiting again next year. So I very much hope that I might see applications from some of you when we open up recruitment again.
Never mention jobs in a room full of PhD students. It's very, very dangerous. Okay. Well, thank you all. I will close off the this now, but if you have any questions, please do contact us through the website. Okay. Thanks again, Audrey. All right.
Bye.
Take care. Bye now.